So everybody, you know why you're here. I'm going to intro Anna a little bit, and I hope you've taken the time to read what I'm going to read to you. But I love kind of digging into this before Anna starts to show her images. Anna, Mia Davidson, is an award-winning social documentary photographer who's based in Seattle, born in New York City. In her childhood home darkroom, she learned to master the fine art of photography from her father, a Magnum Photography collective photographer. Her early years were surrounded by the powerful photographic medium that she later adopted as her tool for social change. Photographer Gordon Park's Farm Service Administration images were an important influence. And I love hearing that personally because influence on me, and we'll get to hear more about that from her, inspiring her commitment to social justice and environmental issues using her camera. She believes in the power of images to influence and inspire and impact the way we see the world around us. Her work is informed by the issues of our times. Davidson seeks community-based organizations and individuals within communities she photographs to become project allies, deepening the perspective within her work, helping change the narrative and increase representation for communities often left out of the artistic foreground. And what we'll learn a little bit, a lot bit more about is the fact that she has published 2 books, Cuba Black and White and Human Nature, Sustainable Farming in the Pacific Northwest. Her exhibitions include the Museum Marseille in France, the Leica Gallery here in Los Angeles, Howard Greenberg Gallery, New York City, and the public arts installations in New York, Seattle, England, and Thailand. Commissioned works from Aperture, USA Television Network, and Photo Documents. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including 2 IPA awards and the British Journal of Photography Portrait of Humanity People's Choice Award. Her work is part of the Zillmer Art Center and the City of Seattle's permanent collections. A little bit more, and not to be left out at all, is Davidson was selected as a 2016 Arts Envoy under the Obama administration. Don't we miss them? She was artist in residence at Photo Center Northwest, lectured at the Annenberg Space for Photography, which I also miss, the Seattle Town Hall, and internationally. When not on assignment, she can be found teaching photography. She's going to be in Los Angeles starting in October. And she also loves hiking and stand-up paddle boarding with her kids and dog. So Anna, the floor is yours. I look forward to seeing all the work.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's a joy to be here with you, having a conversation and getting to show my work with all of you who are here today. Thank you for being with me on this summer day on our computers virtually and adapting to this new world we're living in. But hopefully we'll get to be together in person at some of these workshops that I'll be telling you about as the slideshow progresses. I'm going to start with sharing my screen. I'm going to show you some work from 2 of my books. Cuba Black and White, which I'll start with, was published by Steitel. In 1999, I packed a small backpack with a few essentials, 100 rolls of Tri-X film, 3200 speed film, an old Leica M4P, and 2 lenses. And I went to Cuba really with an open mind about what I might find there. But I was really inspired by sort of the politics of the era and feeling that there was this place during the embargo that was off limits to people from the United States. So there was sort of this de facto embargo on information, imagery, and information about Cuba other than what would trickle in through the news on occasion. There was a lot of sort of, at the time, there was work being done that really showed a lot of peeling paint, sort of old cars, things like that, but I didn't feel the essence of the real place. And I felt a calling to go there and to explore that visually with my camera.
And you said that was in 1999, is that right?
It was in 1999, and that's when the project started, but I proceeded to return to Cuba as often as I could over many years, probably a 10-year period of time, until when the book was published. So I made a lot of connections in Cuba, both personally and with photographers, with peers, and really tried to get to know the culture as best I could and feel connected, both to the people, to families, to individuals, to organizations. And through that, I gained a lot of trust to be invited in with people and into lives, which I'm really grateful for. I wrote a lot. I always keep journals when I'm exploring topics, and that's an important part of my thought process. And so I would write a lot, and that the writing from the journals that I kept helped inform the writing that I would do later for the book. So I was able to kind of touch upon some of my notes and some of my personal thoughts, and also facts about where I was and what people were talking about. I was very interested in sort of life as it was moving around this kind of post-revolutionary era, where there were glimpses of kind of strongholds from the revolution mixed with sort of life, everyday life as we know it. I was really motivated by the belief in the power of photography to affect social change. And I thought if I could bring honest imagery back about what Cuba was like and sort of the reality of the situation, that maybe it could have an effect on the embargo coming to an end in some way, or at the very least help to navigate and inspire dialogue and conversation around Cuba. In college, I had one opportunity that was offered to me, and I didn't take it at the time, and that was to go to Cuba in the early 90s, mid 90s, I guess it was, with a professor who was looking at social justice issues. And it would have been a really interesting journey to take, and I really regretted that choice not to go then. And I really think that sometimes in life there are these moments that are sort of a reckoning and often a catalyst for inspiration later. And so if we're listening to those moments in our own lives, sometimes they can offer direction as to where we go. And so I think of that time and that professor and that moment of sort of missing that opportunity, not taking advantage of that opportunity, and then later being re-inspired to actually go to Cuba with my camera on my own terms.
And act on it. That's such a great comment, and I find it to be very true as well. I would love to hear from you what your intentions were for where you, as you started to photograph within the first couple of years, where you thought about showing those images when they would be first published, but then even before that, what your daily process is like about kind of mapping out or not mapping out your day of where you want to go and the sort of things you want to document, and then maybe how that changes, as it always does for a documentary photographer.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, so I hope I remember. But I think to begin with, well, Amy, can you just break down the first question?
Sure. Well, in fact, I'll go in reverse. Start by all means. I'd love to hear more about when you arrived, where did you consider staying, like in what parts of Cuba, and then perhaps how that started to, shift and inspire you to stay in other parts, perhaps as you went back throughout the years, like you were talking about. And then when you were doing the work, how you thought about mapping out your days, about what you wanted to document, and then from there, of course, how it unfolds.
So I started this photographic exploration in Havana, in the early weeks of the work and the early months and the early trips. But as time went on, I wanted to explore a lot more of the countryside. And so as you see, actually now we're into the countryside imagery. And so after I had kind of gotten in close to what was happening in the urban life, I wanted to see sort of what rural Cuba was like, because there was a real disconnect in terms of even goods and services and information even within the island nation, between country and city. So I was also coming from a personal interest in organic farming. And so I connected with a lot of organizations at the time that were letting me into what would have otherwise been closed farming scenarios to people.
You got some of those introductions.
So yeah, I was able to make connections and introductions. This is a women's collective, for example, a government collective of women farmers who, some of the farmers were one of the few to actually own land in Cuba, and they were given options to kind of farm collectively and be supported by the government with infrastructure, or to own land and privatize and sort of go at it alone. And so I always thought it was really an interesting choice that people were faced with, and what they did with those choices. But I want to just get to the second part of your question, which was about the mapping out of sort of how I go about deciding where my camera is going to take me, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and how I do that. And so I spend a lot of time before embarking upon a photographic project. Sometimes in the beginning, I don't even know it's going to be a long-term project. I know it's of interest to me. I know I have work to do to explore that topic, but I don't always know it's going to be long-term. I know that I'm going to commit to a project once I start the project and I see what it is, see where I'm at with it, and sort of let that momentum take me. But with Cuba, mapping out the where, I always left it to sort of who I was. Sometimes you have to be open to the scenarios in life that come. So photographically, maybe I met someone and they said, oh, why don't you come to this village with me, a little town, come see my family, see where I'm from. Great. These things I couldn't map out ahead of time. You can't always know, where you're going to go or what you're going to do when you're photographing in this kind of travel capacity. But ahead of time, always before I start a project, whether it's Cuba or any of my other projects, I'm always trying to think ahead of time about some of the ideas that I want to explore visually. And then I allow that to sort of take me someplace. But with Cuba, so I ended up in the countryside, sort of at the end of my visual exploration there. And what was important about that for me was that it was sort of like going full circle back to a subject that I had also been simultaneously photographing back in the United States, which was the farm country here in the US. So I'm going to share with you now some of those pictures from Human Nature, which was another book published, this time by Minor Matters Books. And this body of work was an important body of work for me. It was a personal body of work because I was married to an organic farmer, and I was integrally aware of all of the organic farming community in and around outside of Seattle. So I was inspired by this. Mostly, the interesting overlap with the timing of Cuba is that when I discovered the countryside of Cuba, I thought to myself, wow, I really should turn the camera on a little closer to home and, start to photograph sort of what's moving me about the United States. And I had read an article in the New York Times written by Mark Bittman. And one of the things he said struck something in me. And again, that was a moment of sort of reckoning, because he was describing how the United States and our practices of, monocropping, farming, and the diet, the poor diet conditions of the United States,
Yes.
was going to make the future of the U.S. sort of not a pretty bleak future. And I was thinking, as I was reading this, gosh, this is not my reality, as I'm, living out here in the fields with the farmers, and I'm
Uh-huh.
seeing organic produce, and I'm living it, and I see the beauty within the community. And I also was seeing the inspiration, this really vital farming community that was just absolutely inspiring to me. And I felt like that was the story. The story is not about, the story for me was the positive. The story for me was, no, we're not, we can focus on the 2 Diet Cokes a day diet, of the United States, or we can focus on what are people doing about it? What's happening that's offering an alternative? And so I found this community, my community, to be sort of an answer to this. And so I focused my camera on the people I knew around me, around friends of friends and farmers of farmer friends, and my own family. That was a photograph of my daughter. So I very much incorporated my own life into this. And I was simultaneously kind of photographing this for myself when I had also been showing the work around to editors, and someone from Aperture saw the work and suggested, well, they recommended me to be part of something called the Character of America Project, which was a collaboration between Aperture and USA Television Network. They basically hired and commissioned 11 photographers. I was one of them. Other amazing photographers, Mary Ellen Mark, there were a number of people around the US documenting the character of America. And so I was really honored that they chose me, but also chose this project. They wanted me to photograph exactly what I was doing, which was photographing the farmers in this community. And so this work really went internationally. It was on the cover of magazines, it was on billboards, it was sort of everywhere. I was impressed by their collaboration, Aperture and USA's network's ability to sort of get messaging out, and they also produced their own book.
Now, question, I'm interested to know, in the course then of really connecting with all of these places and people, like you said, closer to home for you, then at what points were you going back to Cuba and making, new connections there? How were you kind of sharing that time?
Yeah,
with
so
each year?
when I embark upon a long-term project, sometimes I'm blending, I'm juggling a couple different projects simultaneously, and sometimes I'm not. For Cuba, I spent a lot of years just focused on Cuba, but during that 10 years, I also was exploring this countryside in and amongst where I live. And so it is a juggle. And what's interesting always to me in retrospect is that the 2 themes sort of, they're very different in approach. Obviously, one is 35 millimeter black and white, one's color, medium format. Both are film, but they also share a common link of this countryside and looking at farming and farming culture. And so, so there's sometimes, I wasn't always traveling to Cuba. So when I would be home, I'd be focused on this project, or I would be, juggling the 2. And
I
sometimes,
have to say, I'm really fascinated with both projects, but starting with the Cuba project, because for someone like myself who I have never been able to travel there yet in my life. And so for me, it has been about images. And I think, like you were saying at the top, most of those images that I'm familiar with are of city images. So it is so eye-opening to see these countryside images, and really wonderful for someone like me who personally spends a lot of time in the countryside. I grew up with farmland all around me in the southeast part of the state of Wisconsin. So I'm very familiar with farmland, but with Cuba. So I love seeing how much of that you have brought to light for people like myself who haven't been there, to see those side by side. And then seeing these, so at what point did you, after showing these, and like you were saying, they were starting to get a larger audience and you're starting to show them, did you make them into a book? When did that, how did that come about?
Oh gosh, it was actually years later, after I was photographing for the Character of America project, and then I was going back to publish my Cuba work in Germany with Steidl, and one of the editors from Aperture, who went on to make her own, she left Aperture and she went on to create her own book company, remembered my work and said, hey, let's make a book of that work. It always spoke to her, and she had a special connection with the work, I guess, at the time. And so all of a sudden I was I was producing 2 books almost simultaneously, which was a lot. It's a lot, and it's wonderful, and it was really nice to get the work out, because sometimes when you're making work, at least for me, I might work years and kind of feel like I'm putting that work in a shoebox, so to speak, at least with negatives, and just sort of, I'm making the work and I'm making the work, and especially back with film. And then you don't always know where it's going to go or how it's going to kind of connect into history, into, current events, or how the world will change over the course of the time that you're photographing. And long-term projects to me are so fulfilling, because they can create such a big look over a span of time at a place, and also you have a chance to grow with that project and create some visuals over time that you may not have been able to get if you're just sort of floating on surfaces.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so the farm work brought me to a lot of places. I traveled in Thailand showing this work. It was commissioned by an organization called Photo Document in England, and they showed like 20 of these pictures really big in a train station with text about sustainability. So the power of imagery to make an impact, to make a difference. I love public art, and this project in particular has lent itself to the public sphere, both in Thailand, England, US. There have been quite a few public arts exhibitions of this work. And with Cuba, it's it's an interesting topic, because it's not always in the news anymore. I mean, Cuba at the time, there was a lot about, I guess, sort of this divide between our countries and how close they actually are in proximity. And so once the book was able to be published, I've been able to show that work, but I also have felt so amazed by the reception from the Cuban people about the work. And so I've been included in a lot of shows that are curated by Cubans and with Cuban photographers. And that has like meant so much to me, because I'm not Cuban and I'm not from Cuba, but to be accepted into sort of the conversation about Cuba with this work.
There was phenomenal. Yeah, that always feels really good. Right.
Yeah.
Keeps the conversation going, for sure.
Well, and it's important because it somehow validates that the way I was seeing and the conversations and the way I was feeling and interpreting while I was there was authentic, and it was and it speaks to people who are at the forefront of speaking and showing and talking about Cuba, that this work is somehow accepted in that sphere. And that's important to me as an image maker. It's important to me that I tread lightly and carefully in the worlds that I'm photographing, because I sometimes am part of those worlds, but sometimes I'm not. And so it's a fine line between outsider and insider, and how to make authentic enough connections with people that you can somehow get let in to be able to inform your photographic work in a deeper way.
100%, right? Showing their voice, their perspective truly, and not your perspective on their perspective, so to speak.
Yeah, and I always think, starting a project, I think of it in terms of seeds. Like, is this a seed of an idea worth spreading and sharing? And when I decide that that is a seed of an idea that I do want to cultivate, then I really go deep dive into that. And with this work, the Obama administration, under the Obama administration, I was selected as an arts envoy, and I got to bring this work to Thailand and work with the embassy in Thailand. And that was really special experience. And
tell us a little bit more about that. What did you actually do over there? What were some of the days like practically?
I taught workshops with young photographers, which was really great. I presented my work to all kinds of universities and institutions across the whole island, across the whole nation. And it was really amazing because it was different age groups, so from different backgrounds. And some of the backgrounds were interested in photography. Some of the backgrounds were interested in farming and sustainability. And in Thailand, I guess, right now or at the time when I went, there was sort of a generational divide where a lot of young people did not want to be farmers. And so they were trying to cultivate some interest and regenerate this notion of sort of sustainability and how to incorporate that. So there were a lot of conversations happening both in the art world and in the political sphere, and how those cross-pollinated was exciting and interesting to be part of. So another body of work that I was making during this time, which was sort of an interesting, crossover. When I was deep into my Cuba work, I had an opportunity to go to Ukraine. And so the imagery I'll show you now is from 2004, Ukraine. And this work was not a long-term project. I was there for a little over a month. I focused my attention to the Carpathian Mountains and the villages within the mountains. A lot of these places were remote and hard to get to, either by foot or you needed a 4x4 vehicle. Some of the villages were a little bit easier to access with dirt roads or some forms of roads.
What was the seed of this idea, to give you your phrase back?
Was focusing on countries on the brink of change. And I was already focused and working in Cuba. And so Ukraine, which also had sort of this history and tie with Russia, just like Cuba did, there was a cross sort of link, like in my mind, of how these sort of two places might be interesting visually, photographically. I also had an opportunity to go. So sometimes in life, you're like jumping on moments that are presented to you. So I had an opportunity to go, and I took it, and I went, and then I just kind of increased my time, and I decided that I wanted to focus mostly on the countryside again, because those were sort of themes and interests that I had had in my other bodies of work that I just showed you. So 2004, Ukraine. The wild thing about that was sometimes as photographers, we jump into these situations and historically, we don't know where we are. We know where we are in the present moment, but we don't know where we're going to be politically or in history in months to come. So we're floating, I like to say, sort of as photographers in this moment that we're someplace. And always there's something that happens that I oftentimes don't know that I'm in a moment until after I'm back. And then I get to learn about it as time progresses, and it again informs the work that I'm doing. So for Ukraine, I was there 6 months before what was going to become a major election, an election that was had a lot of issues and politics that were involved with that. But in the time that I was there, it was before the election. But there was, I guess, at the moment, a lot of fear and distrust of people from the United States and foreigners, and who was there and why, and were we meddling with the elections. So I had to get a lot of special permission to clear the path to be able to photograph in the places that I went. And so the Ministry of Culture was aware that I was there and gave permission, and I worked with some priests and organizations. I'm not Catholic, but I had to work within organizations and communities that were going into the mountains and doing work with people. So this, for example, image is of a wood carver who lives in a very remote mountain area. And I was able to go there and be in his home with him because I was introduced by the local priest. And so some of the connections and permission was sort of key to be able to photograph in a place like Ukraine, even in 2004.
Can you tell us a little bit about the conversations you were able to have? Was there translators there for you, and that sort of thing, especially
so
here?
that's a good question, because not only is language barrier an issue, the alphabet is completely different. So there's no like figuring something out by sight. So I traveled with a young translator, a woman. So it was just the two of us, and she was amazing. And basically it was a different way to work than how I worked in Cuba, because I speak enough Spanish to get by to communicate with people just on my own and never needed a translator. Whereas in Ukraine, I was 100% reliant on communicating with people. And maybe a lot of it comes down to, I would still be talking with someone in English and they're talking to me in Ukrainian, and then, we'd translate. So there was some hurdles there with a language barrier for sure, but was able to work through those. And this work right now is actually up at a history museum in Washington State. The Renton History Museum is showing about 20 images from this body of work. And it's just
tremendous. What size are they displaying them at? Do you know?
So I believe that they are 20 by 24 framed, and then there's a wall mural. So
great.
Yeah, so that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Life a little bit. And, in my research about the Carpathian Mountains, it has been a place of refuge and harboring of people for safekeeping over many generations and many, many years. So there's a long history of Ukraine protecting people in their mountains, and that's no different today. So I find that theme is really interesting, and it's wild to have photographed there and set this work aside, and then to have it breathe life now in such a different context. Because really what inspired me to kind of dig my negatives back out of the deep archive is that I felt a sadness, not just about the current war, but that all the imagery we were getting was about war, like was the country at war, and war-torn people fleeing, and I didn't want to lose the sense of place and this sense of um, deep culture that's there, that is all that stands to be lost. So I felt sort of an urgency to bring these pictures back to show sort of what's at stake here.
I'm, I'm definitely glad you have, and I'm certain a lot of people in the audience feel the same. I would love to, maybe if you go back to the beginning, or anyone you want to choose, to kind of talk a little bit about that actual photograph, those people in that space.
Yeah, let's see. So, I mean, we could really go to really almost anyone, but I mean, this is a rug maker, for example, and she makes these rugs underground. This is actually, it's, there's a river that kind of ran through, and they use the water to stretch the wool. Just like really amazing. These are subsistence living people in ways of life that are, I don't know if they're going to come back. I mean, this is the
Right.
devastating thing, right? Because this woman made this by hand. I mean, this is wool from her sheep that she dyed, and then she has to stretch it to make, to weave it and all this stuff. So this is underground, and this is where she can use the water to kind of stretch, and it's lit by one light bulb. So
I would think that one resonates a little, unfortunately, now for folks that have been forced to live in shelters.
absolutely.
And these I love. I feel like I am there sitting with him. You have great sense of spatial awareness and, yeah, perspective.
Thanks, Amy. Herein lies a woman, in her late 80s, who has stacked all that wood by hand.
Mhm.
I mean, just incredible culture, work ethic, culture, the life that sort of surrounds the countryside, and what that is.
Who are these folks? I like this one before.
Ladies are selling their farm stuff at a market. So the eggs, the cream, the milk, I think it was sour cream in the jars. And the butcher I love, because he could be straight from 1950s. And these places that are left, it's like a moment left in time. And that's how I felt like with Cuba too. It's frozen in time, but
Right.
yet it was frozen in time then when I went. But now if you go to Cuba, people are on their cell phones. I mean, good luck getting a photograph without a cell phone in it. It's so different.
You think even in the rural parts, people on their
Well,
cell
not
phones?
so much, because there's one square that gets Wi-Fi, so the teenagers will,
I've read about that. So that was your experience. Yeah.
but I mean, I'm exaggerating, but my point is sort of that times change, and and not taking for granted these moments and these places that may or may not change with the times. So let's see. Yeah. So
What about, you were saying how the Carpathian Mountains were known to, harbor people. So were there any of these folks that you were able to show in this roll of images that were doing or had done that exact thing during their lifetime?
and that's such a good question that I did not have those conversations with them at the time of like, had they harbored or been harboring. And I think part of that was because with translation, it is an interesting dynamic when working with a translator, because it's hard to flow the conversation in the way that we would organically if it's just direct. And yeah, so a lot of what I had to kind of glean from people, I felt like was just intuition or feelings, or sort of what was about their life, but maybe not maybe not so much information about the history other than what I've researched about the area post, which is sort of part of the importance of doing your homework, I like to call it, as photographers. We have homework to do, folks. We have to, when I always call it turning my mind on, before a shoot, during a shoot, after a shoot. It's like engaging our brain and learning about where we're photographing before, during, and after. And sometimes those things change. There's preconceived notions, or you have to filter information and decide, is this what I'm seeing? Is this the reality of the experience that I'm witnessing? And it's a responsibility, in the end, how we use that. But I always turn my brain on first before my eyes, because I think that when we're connected with our thoughts and what our thought process is, our photographs can get a little bit deeper. And I end my Ukraine visuals here with this young woman, because I think I had a natural curiosity towards the end of my journey there with the young people, and like, what is the future for them, and what is to become? And that is the question I left there with. So that's my question mark, and I do think that.
And now what a heavy question mark.
Yeah. And now, now it's really something about, even in her eyes, it's just like a dreamy, I'm going to sit here and think about this. I think I felt like that when I was sitting there with her. It was just sort of, what does the future look like for you? Where will you be? What are you going to do? What are the opportunities? And here we are today.
Are you still in touch with the translator and or any of these individuals that you photographed there, especially with the show being up? I'm really curious to know if they'll be able to see these images again.
I know. Do you know what's amazing is that I am in touch with the translator. I found,
great.
Yeah, I just found her. So we're just now kind of piecing together what has happened. And she was from the city, so she didn't know the people that we photographed personally. I mean, she was on this trip. She had never really left her home place either, like at that time. So she didn't know these people, and she doesn't know what has happened to them. But we're gonna see if we can piece together some information. So
that's tremendous to hear.
Yeah. But during this trip, it was really wild. I learned that I'm Ukrainian, that my roots are Ukrainian. I didn't know that prior to traveling there. I always thought that I was part Russian. I mean, my ancestry, the relatives would always say, we're from here, we're from there. And it would be like Russia, little German, a little French, whatever. But I never heard Ukraine. And then when I went there, all of a sudden, I was deep diving into emails, which I just was researching and looking back upon these emails as I was putting together the show at the museum, from family members who were informing me, oh, actually, your great grandparents were actually from Ukraine, from this village, and look into this place. And so that was really interesting, and kind of, it was wild. I was like, wow.
Oh, it is then, yeah.
Yeah, it's there was more of a connection, I think, that I was maybe searching somehow. Or, sometimes with our photographic work, there's subtle messages or subtle paths that take us to different places, and how that goes, and what can become. But regardless of all that, I have been interested and reaching out to the community here, like in Washington State, the Ukrainian community here, now that the photographs are being shown.
Nice.
And trying to make some connections. There's the Washington State Association, Ukrainian Association, has been very supportive of this work. And I think for a lot of Ukrainians who are just getting here or who have family members who are still in Ukraine, this is a really important work because it does document and preserve this way of life that really is threatened to be lost. So,
In fact, and so, and when, tell everybody again how long the show is up there, and then if there's a place that it will be, soon after, or how they can keep connecting with this work.
so this works at the Renton History Museum up until middle of September, I think September 16th. I'm going to be giving an artist talk there. And a little bit more specifically about this work. And then
So that's great, everybody. You have 2 months.
yeah, to get up to Washington State. And then after that, I don't know yet, but I'm hoping that I can travel this work to other cities around the US and maybe to Europe too. Places where maybe people have relocated from Ukraine that would feel somehow a sense of, I don't know, something, attachment to their past, or some kind of way to connect with everything that's been lost for them. So
I heard something not too long ago with respect to any folks that are living through the atrocities of war, that it's these sorts of images and stories and audio which is about resilience keeping. And that's what you were saying at the top, and I just wanted to underscore you saying that, because that is what it is.
yeah. And I do think as photographers, we bear witness. We bear witness over our lifetime to many subjects, and we don't always know if it's something we keep in our shoebox or if it's something that we actually bring to the light of day. And sometimes history and current events informs that. But I certainly didn't know at the time of going there, to any of the places that I've been, that it would be somehow a bearing of witness to something that is needed for some kind of social change, for some kind of current social change.
So critically, right? You started the conversation, and now, thank goodness, you're keeping up the conversation. It needs to be the loudest megaphone. Please put up again that last slide that you have that shows everybody Mia's, or sorry, I said your middle name first, Anna Mia's, her workshops, which are coming up. And so next I want to have you talk about your workshops. So everybody, you see that first one is in October. She'll come and do one in Venice Beach from the 13th to the 16th. And then in April, the 20th through the 23rd, out in the Coachella Indio Valley. So so tell us about what your kind of process is like, and what the students can kind of expect and get out of both of those, and how they might actually like meet up with you, and what the days might kind of look like.
Yeah. So I've been, just so you know, I've been teaching workshops for many years in Cuba, and then also in the United States. I had been teaching a workshop out in the farm country outside of Seattle, Washington. So I'm really excited to bring my workshops to California now and to work with LACP. I always, with whatever workshop I'm teaching, and it almost wherever, there are a few fundamental things that I feel like help inform our deeper photographic work, and things like how we approach and choose a subject, asking ourselves sort of the why around that, and getting very clear on our direction, and whether it's a project that you already started in Venice, let's say, or in California, if there's a long-term project you've been working on but you want to go deeper with that, or whether it's embarking on a new project in Venice or out at Coachella and Indio Valley. There's so many opportunities to research what the things might be that you're going to photograph, or go with sort of an open mind and then create a body of work as you're as you're approaching photography in a slightly different way. I always like to share my process, my work process, my workflow, from editing to book creation, and also all the different, I bring with me sort of my years of experience, both as a photojournalist with news and magazine. I was a stringer with the AP. So sort of this notion of sort of on assignment, and how do you get a photograph? Like, how do you make something out of nothing, and how do you create some kind of image that is meaningful or impactful, wherever you go, or whatever you're doing. So bringing those experiences, bringing experience with public art sphere, the public art sector. Let's see, looking at public arts, looking at bookmaking, looking at museum exhibitions, gallery exhibitions, sort of how we take our work, and then what do we do with that work after we take it. So a flow, whether your project's ready for that or not, it's always good to have in the back of one's head, what are the possibilities for work after you take the work, so it doesn't just live in a shoebox, so that you can actually bring it to the light of day. And half the battle is editing. So bringing sort of my my love and years of editing, because if you take wonderful pictures but you don't edit them in a way that brings the best to light, then you're only as good as the edit, in the end, right? Sad fact. But so,
are you able to share with people yet how they may be, or like when they'll be doing those edits in the workshop, and like what critique looks like?
Workshop flow. So usually we would get together and meet for sort of an introduction evening the night before the workshop starts, so that I always like to get to know everyone personally and just kind of understand where you're coming from and what you want to get out of the experience, so we can make sure that it's really great for everybody. And then I also like to touch base with people if anyone's needing help with ideas, or if you already have a project that you've been working on, you're ready to like go to the next level. So I sort of touch point on where everyone's at individually. And then we do shooting from, first early light till, midday. I think we're going to do some photo editing midday for the 2 days, and then for each of the 2 days. And then I think one more shoot session the last day with a final edit session, so that everyone can kind of go home with a cohesive body of work that's like, you were just on an assignment and this is what you're going to show the photo editor. So you could actually take that and pitch it, as a story. And we could talk about that too, how to pitch story ideas to magazine editors, how to cold call or whatever, if that's where you're at. Or maybe you're at a place where you've been working on a book project and you just want to like bring it home now to roost. So we could work on that.
Right, like you said, a little different for everybody. So that's great. You'll approach all of those.
Yeah, with people where they're at. So and wow, it's a visual masterpiece over at Venice Beach and Coachella. So I think we'll be looking for ways to see things in a different way and be bringing a depth to our work that actually maybe informs something different about those places that are not preconceived notions.
And I will leave it up to Los Angeles Center of Photography to tell our audience and the people that are interested about like specifics, especially with the October one coming up, for people who don't live in Los Angeles, like where they might stay and those sorts of things. Yes.
Workshop experience is always a wonderful way to take time for yourself to create really strong work, and to kind of map that time and space out to be able to create some kind of body of work that you're proud of. That's the goal.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, you carving out that time. And if it's away from your regular routine, so much the very better.
Yeah.
Oh, I see a link in the chat. And so hopefully all the participants are seeing that Kevin put up. Thank you, Kevin, for the actual workshops.
Great.
So everybody be sure to click on that. Anna, would you like to share any last thoughts about those images that you showed? And if not, LACP has asked me to give you, let's see, do they want me to give you these rapid fire questions, or we're going to go to Q&A first? Oh, rapid fire questions to you first, basically to help our audience maybe get to know you on a little more intimate level versus just the work. And then that'll help inform their questions perhaps. So are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, hands together, she's ready. Okay, let me just scroll to where those are. Oh, great one. Should be a softball quick one. What's your favorite book or movie?
Ooh, oh my gosh, that's hard. There's so
It's hard.
I love the Kite Runner book.
Say it again.
Kite Runner. It's a book. So
I still didn't say it one more time. I'm not hearing it.
Kite Runner.
Oh, the Kite Runner.
Yeah, and anything. I love films. So anything documentary.
Anything, the last documentary that you really liked or you really connected with?
We'll come back to that.
Go back to that. Okay. What's your favorite drink?
I love water with lemon.
Oh, Janet's here. That's working at LACP. It looks like she was drinking that, I think. Giving out Janice's answer. What part of the world would you love to visit that you haven't already?
I would love to go to India. I've never been to India.
Likewise.
Yeah.
A friend of my father's Indian, and I have so many stories from him and still haven't been. What profession other than photography would you have enjoyed?
That's interesting. I don't often daydream about other professions. So, photographer, no. Yeah. Other than photography, I mean, I'm a people person, so really it could have been anything with people. But I do have a strong moral compass about social justice. So maybe a lawyer that was working in some capacity to bring social justice to task.
I can see that for sure. Tell us something about you that we wouldn't possibly know.
Ooh.
Reveal.
Well, the Ukrainian heritage piece is, you first heard it here.
Yeah.
That's something. I love, well, you said in the beginning, I love hiking and the outdoors. So I'm a big believer in the power of nature and, nature bathing, as they say, I think in Japan. I believe in it. Walks in the woods, hikes, out on the water, paddle boarding, you name it. Sign me up for it.
I hope you get to do that with some of your students at either or both of those workshops.
Thank you. And I think that people who play together stay together. So we definitely try and mix in some fun with our hard work on workshops.
I hope I find the time to get to do that with you and your students too, because I do love those things, kayaker and swimmer in the ocean. I got to get down there a couple days ago. It's warm now, everybody, in case you haven't been in yet, you should go.
I will sign me up for that date.
Anna, thank you so much. But before we go, this is the great time for our audience to ask their Q&As. So I leave it to you. Maybe you want to put up those images again while we ask the Q&As, or wait until the questions come and then go to those specific images. But I turn it over to Kevin or Janice, I guess. Kevin or Janice, you're going to help us get some Q&As going?
Oh, Adorable baby.
Hi. Sorry, working mother over here. So my baby. I have a somewhat newish.
Don't apologize.
So people, please don't be shy. This is your time to ask. You can just type it in the chat, or you can unmute. Well, actually, no, you got to type it in the chat because this is a webinar format. So, any questions? Please type them in.
Type.
We're doing the elevator music now as people type.
Remember the farming in Seattle, the Cuba work, and then the work in the Ukraine. And then, of course, any questions about the workshops?
And any upcoming workshops as well. And yeah, if you have any questions regarding those workshops, you can also email us as well. If we're, you know.
Yeah, and I flashed up on the screen how to reach me either, you know, on social media or by email. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the workshops or, you know, or want to find me for some reason.
Fabulous. So Amy, we do actually have a question in the chat. Do you want me to read it out or do you want to take care of that?
Oh, here I see. Oh, great. And it comes from Nancy K, who I totally love and admire. And she is now currently serving as president of the local Los Angeles ASNP board. Her question is, are you ever required to provide prints, or are they done by the exhibitor, and the framing as well, the prints and the framing?
Are you talking about for the museum show? Or
I think so. Nancy, are you talking about museum shows? Any and all, she says.
Okay, so for example, when I had an image from my Cuba work, it was, I don't know if you recall it, but it's the lovers in the cafe. That picture was going to be blown up the size of a mural, and so it was in France. They had to do it. They had to create the mural there in France, and I didn't have to supply them with an actual print. I supplied them with a high res scan of my negative, and they took it from there. So that was that scenario. The museum here in Washington wanted all framed and matted work. So everything, the deliverables were completely ready to hang. And I wrote all the text for the walls to go along with those images. They printed out the text. They also did a wall mural and took care of the wall mural. And I wanted maps to be included. So we chose 2 images of maps of the area to include in the exhibition. But they did, even though I did the framing and the matting and the printing of that work, the museum covered that cost. So I don't know if that was part of what you were asking. So that's not out of pocket for the photographer, at least in my case with either show.
That's a great question, Nancy. And my experience has been kind of like Anna's saying, it depends show to show which gallery you're dealing with. Great question. Nancy says, thanks.
I will add that, I mean, galleries are a little bit different, and galleries, you do have to usually supply your own prints from print to matte to frame or whatever, however you're framing it. And generally speaking, the gallery does not cover that cost. And then you're sharing, of course, the cost of sales. So the proceeds from sales. So galleries and museums work a little bit different from my experience in those 2 departments.
And thank you, Nancy, again for that question. Anybody else? Questions? We have the time and we're happy to answer them. Workshop process questions. I was glad that you talked about the, can you tell us a little bit again about critique? Like, do you, during a typical workshop day, do you shoot, and then just critique at the end? Do you kind of break it up? How do you like to do that?
I like to do the edit and critique after each shoot, or at least the second day, because it's so important to have that to inform the next shoot. I mean, it's nice to incorporate that as we go. And I like individual critiques, and I also like group critiques. So I generally mix it up with those two things, because everyone can learn from what I'm saying about the work of someone else. So listening to some of the critiques can be almost as advantageous as getting a critique of one's own work. So we try and have that kind of camaraderie and conversation. And then with the edit, I like to do a final edit with each person individually. And then I love to show everyone's final edit to everybody, like a group.
To the group.
Of, slideshow, so that everyone can kind of see what we all created together.
Right. And isn't it always so amazingly revealing just how different perspectives are from being in that same space? I
have to say, I have been so blown away at some of the workshops that I've taught, like I've been so inspired by how much growth can happen over 3 days or more. It's really beautiful. And I think when we give ourselves a chance to deep dive into something and to map out that time and space for ourselves, the sky's the limit for growth and really developing. So,
in fact, it's so true. It's so true. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to, I think, kind of wrap it up. But Janice and Kevin, you tell us if you want us to vamp a little bit.
Well, look, I want to
people out of their shells.
Thank you so much, Amy, for being a wonderful moderator tonight.
You're welcome.
And
so glad to be here for Anna.
Anna, thank you so much for your amazing presentation, and thank you all for joining us. Once again, the links to Anna's upcoming workshops are in the chat, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us or feel free to reach out to Anna. And thank you all. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.